All right, welcome to hour 4 of Living Energy Day, and we've had a great start so far, and you'll be able to watch any of these replays as much as you like. But today I'm talking with Micheal and Elizabeth Fessler, who are from Herbalix Restoratives, and they are going to talk to us about detox, and they've got a real unique approach to it, and really heavy metal detox and aluminum, which is something we all need to be very aware of, especially as we get older. And so, Micheal, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. I first of all, a little bit of a background about our company. It started in 1999, and it involved a neurosurgeon, David B. Mullane, and Judith Pillsbury. And their backgrounds speak for themselves. One was a herbalist, and the other one was a neurosurgeon. And Dr. Mullane had a lot of problems with nerve endings, and he later had diabetes and everything, and it was the topical products that had a lot of chemicals in them that bothered him. And Judith Pillsbury was the one that kind of pointed out synthetic chemicals and petroleums are in these ingredients and how they can affect the skin. So Dr. Mullane wanted to form a company that could make safe products that people could use, and from that we accumulated a lot of knowledge. And one of the areas that we went into was looking at a deodorant and something other than an antiperspirant, which has aluminum in it. And so we developed something called detox cleansing deodorant, and it was in the testing for that product against the antiperspirant, we started to realize that the aluminum was a real issue in people, because we found out the adage, I don't use antiperspirant, I shouldn't have any aluminum in me. Well, we found out in the simple skin test that that we have aluminum in us all the time. We have a plethora of aluminum, and it comes from a lot of different sources. So we had to we developed a clinical by using a skin test to actually tape the underarms to see what was in the skin. And so we did a first week of the same people without any antiperspirant. We did the second week with antiperspirant, and the third week we did with our product. What was interesting to notice with the antiperspirant was it's kind of similar in the underarm. So we could actually tell in these tests that were put into mass spectrometry that you could see who was left and right-handed, because we were able to determine in the non-dominant side more of the metals started to build up. And that kind of fascinated me, because I wanted to know why it's stored on that side and what were the associated diseases close to that side. And that started this whole vein of research about aluminum and where it stores and how it's coming through the body. And the closest disease to the underarm on the left upper side was the breast cancer. And we started to see, when we started to interview and talk to clinics and research centers, that they were always investigating the upper outer quadrant of the left breast. And we kept saying, well, were they left or right-handed? And they said, we don't know. And we said, well, we're losing a whole lot of data, information, by not asking people if they're left or right-handed, because the dynamics of the body is that if the dominant arm burns off the salts, the non-dominant side is where we found the storage. And so we started researching. We went back up into the underarm and to find out how that drainage really worked. And we found out that really connected to it is a whole bunch of parts of the body, the brain, the gums, the lymphatics in the gums drain through there, the thyroid, and the breast. So when people use like a crystal style deodorant, which is pure aluminum, they say, well, they tell us it's not aluminum. Well, we did a little investigation, and we actually sent that out to a gemologist who actually was able to put these crystal stones on his spectrometer. And he's from Stone Group Laboratories, and he does gems from around the world for Christie's and Sotheby's to make sure that they're diamonds. And he said they're all aluminum that he tested. So
Wow.
you're putting pure aluminum in the underarm. And so when you register in spectrometry, it just looks at the family of aluminum. So there's so many different forms of aluminum. But what does aluminum really do? And one of the things that we found out, because we started working with aluminum scientists from the Micheal University, and they gathered all the scientists from around the world, and we started culling all the research papers, and we got to sit down with them. And you know, we're looking at the anatomy, we're looking at this part, and they're looking at all different sources. And one of the main things that we found out was that aluminum depletes the body of calcium. It displaces the calcium. And we didn't understand exactly how that worked until we were introduced to a device. It's a spectrophotometer called the Oligoscan. And we found out this device was able to look at the sodium potassium pumps of the body, which we thought was very interesting. But nobody ever added the aluminum as a sodium to the sodium potassiums. So what we were really seeing when we started working this with the tissues was that the balance was being thrown off by aluminum. So what it was doing is that in the sodium channels that opened up first, it was extending the length of the sodium channels and cutting off the potassium channels, and actually kicking out calcium to bind with the aluminum. And the way we know that is that most of us are familiar with the egg, and that if you put an ink to it, and I'm just going to put a little bit of ink on here, and you stick it, and you just let it dry. But if you put it in water, it's not going to dissolve. It's going to stay there. And that's what happens, we found out, why women were getting so much calcification in the breast. We found out from the aluminum scientists that there's a lot of aluminum in breast tissue, and it stores there. And so, and nobody was looking at how to route out the aluminum out of the breast tissue. And we discovered by the underarm is the main source of kicking it out, plus the skin. And so all this started to kind of generate a whole lot of interest, that we went into a clinical to discover how to use the skin topically to heat up the breast and to pump out through the underarm the cells. I don't think many people are aware of that they really need to think about cleaning the breast tissue, like a colonoscopy, to get the cleansing. Because when you leave the salts in, the aluminum salts and other metal contaminants that can get in there, and you go in front of a mammogram, that X-ray is absorbing into the metals. And so it's called density. It's called, and they don't understand why, because most people have not understood that the breasts need to be cleansing. And so when women tell us there's pain and there's a lot of association with that, we understand. So we went ahead with our clinical with thermography, and I'll show you a picture that kind of, this is a picture of fibrocystic breast. So what you're really looking at when we did this, we asked that they not just do the breast, but we wanted to see what was coming up above, because we suspected by gravity something was, we had to think of a source, because in tumors, breast tumors, that you have a lot of foreign metal, cadmium and arsenic and aluminum in these tumors. So what was the source of that? And we were able, that when we did it, that we had them shoot, which we thought was a thyroid. We found out, and I'm going to show you another one of the same person, earrings. mixed metal earrings were actually working their way, the body's so efficient, bringing them back in and putting and heating up the subclavian. Now, the subclavian is a very important lymph node. What happens, it's part of the plumbing system to filter out. And what they do is they're supposed to transfer it to the underarm. Well, in this case, and I'm going to go back to the other picture, they're not. They're actually, so these metals, just like dental work, can actually work their way down into the breast tissue.
Wow.
And so you've got, you know, like a volcano flow and just from these earrings, and we don't know which ones all the time because we don't know the metal contents. So when we had people take off their earrings, that we saw this changed, and we're able to resolve and get symmetry in the breast. So it's really fascinating. But the story didn't end there, which was really interesting, because we started to go through and we found out that in two cancers, colon cancer or breast cancer, a lot of times the liver is involved. And so sometimes in the literature that they're not sure that, and I got a question about silver and gold. Silver earrings, we do believe, have a lot of contaminants in it. So in the we have the clinicals that they were buying these earrings off the streets and finding out that they were so contaminated with nickel and other things. So we don't know, and some golds are contaminated, but you have to think about on an earring, if you're putting a cell phone up to the ear, you're grounding and you're maybe absorbing some things from your cell phone. So you've got to think about that item. But what we do know, the metals come down and can get into the liver. And we believe that the liver has to be purged topically to be able to help, because we found out that in mice, when they fed them aluminum for Alzheimer's, they were looking for Alzheimer's. They thought if we fed them mice aluminum in their water, and then we fed them just water, and then we fed them aluminum in citrate, and then they cut up the organs, and they found out that in the aluminum in the water, 3 times more went to the liver than to the brain.
Hmm.
And then when they added the citrate, which, you know, it's like, and I'll explain that in a second, the citrate plus the aluminum multiplied it 9 times to the liver, to the brain. And they were very disappointed why it went to the liver. But we do know now that the aluminum plays a big role in the alumina in the liver. So when we tell people that, you know, that when you feed somebody the cereals, the breads and the cereals are one of the highest amount of aluminum that you can get in the day. And that was from the Canadians doing the study on aluminum, what they found it in. So when you add a breakfast cereal in the morning, the kids are eating, and then they have orange juice, which is citrate, that's where they're getting a heavy dose of aluminum. And, you know, when we're looking at obesity, but let's go back. That a lot of people use castor oil packs on that area, on the liver area, and that's an Edgar Cayce treatment that was a long time ago from the 1915, 20s. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, why was he addressing the liver, not the breast? Because the liver plays a big importance into the overall body, in the circulation of the body. So the aluminum is unavoidable because it's in air, water, and food. And we do now know that in testing the oceans, that they're finding such a high level just sitting on the ocean water, which means we're breathing it from the aluminum smelter plants that are circulating the air all around the world, and they're not controlled. In fact, the pollution is probably beyond what coal plants are, and so you know, that's something to be thinking of. But we do know that we've been able to, and I'll give you another one. this is somebody that went through a purging and were able to use the underarm and the subclavian and clean that out. And that's a 6 week,
6 weeks, yes.
6 weeks of getting into symmetry. And this is what we ended up with. This is what we started with. But what's interesting that you can see the hot spots, and I'm gonna as the axilla starts to clean up, that's what people can see with thermography if it's really moving out of the body. And getting back to antiperspirants, crystal deodorants, that in the books, that on the deodorant books, that you can lose the ability to sweat with long-term usage. And that's old in the old literature, but nobody ever reads anything past the 1960s and 70s from the deodorant. And some of that stuff is hard to find, but we do have the literature on that. So aluminum is an ever-expanding problem for the community. And it's interesting that my interest went back to using these poultices probably from my days being as a researcher underwater studies in Southern California. And I noticed that when I got my certification at UCLA for being a scuba diver, they took us to Malibu. And I thought, that when we went diving, I kept waiting for the kelp to show up. There was no kelp because all the homes in Malibu were using their phosphate detergents that were killing off the water, and they weren't regulated at that time. So in my years down there, I could see that the changes going on with the depletion of the kelp, and actually the water becoming a desert. And the fisheries, I mean, there was lack of any fish and shellfish. And so most people aren't privy to that information. And they don't know that 70% of our oxygen comes from the kelp beds. And it's interesting, all our sewage is absorbed by kelp. So I've learned how to use kelp and poultices to be able to use, target the liver, the breast, and different parts of the body for the lymphatic. And so, what we're trying to do is keep the lymphatic and purge it of the poisons and the toxicity.
Why don't you talk a bit about, a little more about the poultices and exactly what that is and how you do use those? You kind of really, more of an older treatment, I would think people were more used to doing in the old days, right? Making poultices for a lot of things, and we don't see a lot of it these days, do we?
No, and especially we're in an industrial world today, and the way we have to look at this is that 80% of people tested on the Oligoscan, including the doctors, are showing heavy metal intoxication. I mean, that's mercury, cadmium, nickel, I mean, you name it. And it's coming from so many areas, air, water, food, medications, cosmetics. And so when we look at it, 90% of those people test highest on aluminum. And so when we talked about the sodium potassium levels, that the whole body now is being shielded with aluminum. So we're not excreting sweat. We're not excreting the metals like we should. And so when I look at the Oligoscan and I look at somebody's scanned, and I can look at their heavy metals and I can say what they're, what's not going to show up on their minerals, or I can look at their minerals and I can, before I even look at their heavy metals, I know what's going on with their heavy metals. And so you're seeing a loss of magnesium. You're seeing a lot of people use up a lot of calcium. And like cows, you don't get calcium from taking it orally. You have to think like the cows eat a sodium lick. They use a sodium lick and they eat grass and they make lots of calcium. So the reason why we use a poultice is because if that aluminum is in the storage of the skin, that you need to detox from the outside of the skin first because if the heavy metals are hiding right under the skin, you're just going to bring it back in. On the Olympus scan, I can tell when somebody doesn't, they favor a shower over a bath, or they don't have a bath. It shows up that they're not excreting enough of heavy metals, which is really fascinating to me, that we need to bring this information up.
What is the oligoscan you keep referring to? What is that exactly?
Well, it's and I got to go back to it's a spectrophotometer, and so every element on Earth can be picked up by a mass spectrometer of some sort. Even the moon rocks that were a spectrometer was used to detect what they were made of, and I'm proud to say that my uncle was the first scientist with NASA to use a mass spectrometer to examine these rocks. And he told me when I was in the lab in the 70s, he said, we use the moon rocks as a standard for some metals because the whole Earth has been contaminated with radiation and everything else. So isn't that interesting that they had to use a moon rock to tell what was really iron was made out of? I mean, to look at different metals. So the oligoscan is now, instead of me sending out a tissue sample, it's a in-house mobile device that actually uses a spectrophotometer. It uses a light on the palm of the hand. It will give me 14 heavy metals and 20 minerals, an assortment of acidosis and oxidative stress and everything. So I can instantly work with somebody immediately, and where blood, urine, and hair analysis is removing something out of the body, I'm looking at something, a live tissue report card of what's going on in that body. So I can actually tell somebody and not miss a lot of information that you might miss in blood, because blood, metals aren't circulating in blood. If people are looking at lead in blood, the metals are storing in tissue. And that's where you want to go. And that the light is going through the intracellular through many layers of, and it's counting all these cells of where the metals are.
Okay. Well, I know, like, you have a background in construction, but I know, for instance, just in the simple way, metals in the ground and metals touching concrete have all kind of properties, right? All kind of issues that come up. So when we think about the earrings, you think, well, that can really react with the body, right? Because of this chemical and the interactive of the elements in the metals. And
yeah, what we think is that if somebody gets a thermography and they've got, put the earrings on, have your cup of coffee or orange juice or whatever you normally do, and go in like that. So we get an idea of the lifestyle, because when you come in and you've done these things, you've altered the data that we need to capture.
What you're looking for is what is the
here's
contributors to the reason that they're getting certain readings.
Right, and it's always our view is when we see something, what is the source, so we can have the person understand the source of and have the knowledge and understanding. Then what we want to do is find a way that we can have this purged out of their body, whether it starts with a bath, sauna, jacuzzi. These all work with the skin. And so they're all very important ways to use the skin to get past that aluminum shield, that kryptonite that we didn't know that's right under the skin, pretty much. And so we when we look at the obesity in this country, that we have, as I told you about the mice, that when they were feeding them aluminum, they were gaining weight. And so they started to realize that the one organ that was creating the obesity was the aluminum storing in the liver. And everybody's looking at, doing this. They don't know that it's a toxic metal that's affecting the circulation of the body. So what we're seeing is that you see these necklines, these fingers, the ankles, and these are all built up from the aluminum. It's the liver is affected the circulation of the body. But there's a little more that goes on what aluminum does. Remember I mentioned how it depletes the calcium, and that if people would take a look at their heels, on the bottom of their feet, and if they're callous or they're dried, it usually means that the metal salts have dried out the bottom of their feet. And now what's going to happen is that lymphatic drainage is going to be backing up the lymphatic trunk. And the first thing I find, and people can do a great job of detox and they take all the right supplements, I just check the knee and I palpate the inside of the knee. And if it's sore, it usually means that lymph node's blocked. And so it means the fluids aren't getting down to the bottom of the feet. And I just have to tap, the back of the knee or look at the thigh. And if it's, if there's edema and there's a water gathering in there, that usually means they're not draining fast enough. And they didn't know that. It's no fault of their own. But now that they know that just draining the bottom of the feet and working what we do, a topical product up to their knee, that we can vasodilate and get it to those fluids down. Because if you don't get the lymphatic trunk open up, it's going to back up into the inner thighs. We're going to have prostate vaginal problems and cysts and things like that, and then the hip problems, and then it works its way back up to the spine into the occipitals. Kind of interesting, huh? So with a lot of times what we have is we do our poultices at nighttime because we find that it's undisturbed, and that's when the lymphatics slow down, and that's when you have certain cells that will collect. So while during the day most of our oxygen and lymphatics are working with our body for moving the muscles, at nighttime we find it's your best option to do the detoxification. Plus, I can't put you in the ocean or I can't stick you in a bath for 8 hours, but if I can put a poultice and target a certain part of your body for 8 hours, it's extremely by osmosis. Actually, I'm purging by osmosis, and as you said, this is a way people used to do things in the past, but now that we have effectively, we can find the right kelp from the right part of the world. We can find, organic coriander seed that binds the metals. So we're using these different herbs and sea and plant-based herbs to be able to kind of work with the body, because when you work with certain synthetics, the skin doesn't like to move. It doesn't. There's a resistance by the effect of the body on the synthetic chemicals and petroleums. So the bioavailability of the tissue to use the sodium potassium channels, we can work it both ways. We can work it to pull out, or we can use it to put in. And that's why you see, just for instance, I'll refer to vaccines. They use adjuvants, the aluminum adjuvants, because they know they can get into every cell of the body with an adjuvant. So what we're using is a higher form in a kelp to be able to osmotically attract that to outside the skin.
Okay.
And I'm going to mention another source. It's called phosphide poisoning. Phosphide is a fumigant, an herbicide that is used in pellets in the silos across this country. As an aluminum fumigant, they fumigate our grains in these silos for a day or two. And nobody goes in these things, but it's to kill the rodents and the bugs and everything. And they're doing this to organic grains too. And they tested in blood and urine and didn't find anything. But this this group in India, when they had a few people that were severely injured and in death, they decided to do the tissue sampling of these people, and they found out with mass spectrometry, it showed up.
Wow.
And this is an unknown source that's used in several different areas that it's going undetected.
Yeah, well, I looked. I saw one of those reports about, you know, how I won't name the company that starts with M that seems to just come up with all kind of poisons, but I looked at one of their brochures online, and it talked about how you should spray the wheat with Roundup. Oh, I shouldn't mention the name, but spray the wheat with Roundup right before harvest because it would kill it thoroughly, so you get a higher yield. And then they put it straight in the silos. They don't have any way to take the Roundup off of it. So this is public information. This is not people that are crazy saying this. This is what these companies actually tell the farmers to do, is spray this stuff. And so it's going on everywhere.
Yeah, and the other thing is that the soils can be depleted, and these aluminum salts are coming to the surface. And so they have to use a lot of additives, and they use a lot of aluminum additives in with the soil. So we found out through wheat are great chelators. Corn and wheat are great chelator plants for picking up aluminum. And so what they found is that they needed to genetically modify plants so they could get past the salts. And so what they do is, if they can keep the salts from destroying the root for the first 6 weeks, then it doesn't make any difference. Then they can add all the aluminum in the water, in the soil, whatever, because the inflammation now, because aluminum's an astringent, they can add it into the plant and it absorbs more water, and they will get more money for selling you just inflammation from the astringent of aluminum. Now tag, it's in your body, and that's why we're registering across the country so many people with high levels of aluminum.
And you'd mentioned the other day we were talking that they don't even seem to count aluminum as a heavy metal toxin when they do these tests. Talk about that some. I forget what it was exactly you mentioned now, but they weren't even looking for this while they're even looking at other heavy metal.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. You know, and that is one that I sent out because I work with a lot of, you know, prostate. I wanted to find out if, for the prostate, and this is for all the gentlemen that are listening, that, you know, there's a lot of metals that are in there, and I contacted a couple cancer centers, the big ones here in Seattle and in Arizona, or Texas, mind you. So, and I asked if anybody was working on, for the prostate, aluminum in prostate cancer, and they said, no, we did all the heavy metals. And I said, well, did you do aluminum? And they said, they looked at me and they were like, it's like, nobody asked us to. And so this is, I've got one, April 20th, 2016. I sent an email to the cancer groups. This is what their response to me was: thank you for your email to Stand Up to Cancer, the SU2C that was on TV not too long ago. The American Association for Cancer Research is a scientific partner of SU2C and administers the Translational Cancer Research Grants. There are 2 prostate cancer dream teams funded by SU2C and the Prostate Cancer Foundation, neither of which studies aluminum levels in prostate. Shall I say any more? And all I asked for was, does any of your scientific teams have any data on the levels of aluminum metal ions in diseased prostate?
Wow.
So, gentlemen, you are, you know, what can I say? Nobody is even, and so while money's going in there, nobody is even looking into that. So, and I, you know, when people think of aluminum, they also think about Alzheimer's. Yep. And it's my thought that, you know, these combination of using antiperspirants and the aluminum in the air, water, and food. But I'm very suspicious of the liver, and the fact that as we talked about, in the forehead, there's a lymph node on both sides, and there's lymph nodes here. And the absence of sweat the absence of lymphatic fluid through those. So while everybody's looking to, and I've seen many clinicals where they're actually trying to force the brain, they're trying to force the synapses to operate, but nobody is looking in the trash. The trash is in the sweat of the underarm. So if somebody's not sweating, I'm going to start worrying about the breast, the thyroid, the gums, and the brain. So I think there could be some, we're very open to research in those fields with people. We've already worked there. We've got thermography scans of people using it on their brain and seeing the changes in the what we call the inflammation in there. But I wanted to go back. This is something for people to think about. With a crystal deodorant, we've seen a high influence of root canals on the non-dominant side. So the usage of the crystal deodorant, a lot of people have told us that, yeah, I have a root canal and it's on the left side, and that's very, very bad for the breast. We also see with antiperspirants and crystal deodorants a lot of thyroid problems. A lot of people have hyperthyroid, and we, that is one area that, as you saw in the scans, that is an area where the thyroid drains. And so if you're wearing earrings or you have these root canals, your thyroid's on here, the metals are cascading down, they have to be influencing. But I know in the tumors of thyroids, they find a lot of aluminum and they find a lot of calcification.
Well, I know aluminum is heavily used in municipal drinking water because I used to work in that industry years ago, and obviously even the aluminum fluoride based, fluoride treatments, but also just the alum, all the kind of stuff they dump in the water for, it's horrific, really.
Yeah, and and just before I get there, Mike, I want to mention piercings and tattoos, because some tattoos, if they have cadmium and other heavy metals, can leach through the system. So they're suspecting piercings in different parts of the body. We don't know about the metals, what's really inside those metals. So it opens up that field too. But now getting back to the filters, I was at a conference where somebody was mentioning about filtering your water and how they use aluminum filters. And when he heard my little talk on what aluminum does to the body, it was very disturbing, because most filters and most city filters use aluminum for their water. And so when they want to fluorinate water and you're on a lot of heavy medications, you want to be think about all those, because I'll give you an idea. Aspirin can have 11% aluminum salts in it. And you've got talc, which can have aluminum, and a lot of medications have aluminum, and they're storing in the liver. So if you got a lot of aluminum and you got a lot of medication, you're actually affecting the body. And another thing, hot water heaters, the sacrificial anode is made out of aluminum, and you can change it out for something, zinc. Zinc is very good because a lot of people are low in zinc. And we're going back to the egg here. Where am I here on that? Oh, here we go. And see, it's not, the aluminum will not separate itself. That is called, I'll just rub it like that, and it's not really,
it's wet.
It's wet. So when you have aluminum, it's just something that we have to put on in front of where it's coming from, how to avoid it. And in fact, they just removed the color dye from some cereals, because the kids with attention deficit disorder were getting hyperactive. And most people don't know in cereals that a lot of the food colorings are made out of aluminum lake. Those are aluminums that they're putting in. So certain dyes have these in. So you have to be like, I found out I was, mint jelly. They use blue and yellow aluminum dyes to make the green.
Oh, wow.
So
I just want to say one thing real quick about aluminum, because it is an element that has no benefit to the human body whatsoever. So any amount of aluminum is not going to be beneficial to us. And what we're doing is we're accumulating it, as you can hear, every day at mass amounts. And as we age, we get progressively more toxic. And it starts now at birth because we come into a toxic world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's epidemic. And the aluminum scientists, when we've followed their conferences and we've attended, and we've been able to ask questions. And we asked, like, why isn't, your government doing something? And they said, the aluminum associations are so powerful, they actually go after people who go against aluminum. And because there's so much money involved in aluminum, that it's a very difficult element to control.
Yeah, I remember reading years ago that the head of Alcoa was Secretary of the Treasury, the treasurer for the U.S., and that he was, back then they were kind of the EPA, and so he's the one that actually, it was a toxic waste, and then they figured out they could put it in drinking water, even though the studies were done on natural fluoridated lakes in New York State, which was a different type of fluoride. It was a calcium fluoride or something versus a I don't know what it was, aluminum fluoride or what, I don't know chemistry too well, but it was a different thing they were using, and they weren't actually controlling for things like cancer and other things either. But he was in an influential position, according to what I read, and that was able to take a toxic waste that cost him a lot of money to get rid of and actually get paid to put it in the water and let us all pay for the benefit of drinking it. So it's frightening.
It's funny that you mentioned, I had a call one time, a lady was ordering, and I happened to pick up the phone. She was ordering some of our detox deodorant. And I just kind of asked her what she's using it for. And she said, well, I wanted to get rid of my deodorant. And so, she was reordering. And I found out by using your deodorant, and it helped me. And I said, helped you in what way? And she said, well, I've been on thyroid medicine for 20 years. I live in New York. I found out, that I got off fluorinated water, and I used your detox on my neck for some reason. I just put it on there. And I just recently, she said, went in to have my thyroid checked. And she said, they told me that my thyroid was dead. But on this time, this trip, they said, we don't know how to tell you this, but your thyroid's coming back to life.
Wow.
So
clean out the garbage.
Yeah, and we find, like, just where we are in Seattle, there's a lot of fluorinated water, and we'll see people all broke out around here because they're not digesting correctly, because the aluminum likes to get into lymph nodes.
Wow. Yeah.
So and so we address, the axilla. We can address the we have a breast cream. We have for the stomach and the whole liver area, we have a belly cream, and then we have for the men what we call upright. And this is in fertility. There's a problem with aluminum in that they in the spermacea, that they found a lot of aluminum, and the in young men, their sperm count is now actually going down. That's why these fertility clinics are starting up. But Chris Exley, who did a study on the aluminum in a fertility clinic, found that aluminum is involved. And so we address this and we have to think about males and females before conception, that the male should take responsibility to detox that whole area, the whole pelvic floor. And because we know in the Iraq War, during Bush 1 Senior, that the spent uranium and all the military debris that was over there, that it was actually the Iraqi soldiers that were causing the birth defects in children.
Okay, wow.
So my thought is that and I've not seen any literature that looks at children that could it be that the parents, and this is what we find from the oligoscan, non-excretors for heavy metals. Are the parents so full of heavy metals that the child is unable to displace the aluminum in early, and especially premature children, that they're inundated with the vaccines right there, and they're not able to excrete the adjuvant.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to test a child for aluminum toxicity. But we do believe that in doing electrocardiograms, that we may be able to pick up as we said, the blip in the sodium potassium of the child, that we might be able to see if the magnesium potassium levels, and be able to distinguish that if they're excretors or non-excretors. So this is all brand new territory that we have been trying to capture in the autistic world. The other thing is in vaccines that I've been looking for literature, I have not found it, because when they do use aluminum adjuvants, that in the manufacturing, that heavy metals can settle, and that in the vial of the vaccine, who's to know from the first vial to the middle to the end of the manufacturing, when they make production, that they have the same amount of the vaccine aluminum adjuvant, because I make deodorants daytime and nighttime, and I know that the kelp tends to settle in our detox deodorant. And I asked a famous scientist in the studying aluminum and vaccines, and she actually held up a French aluminum adjuvant, and she showed me the settling of the aluminum. And so if somebody's not watching when they make these, or if they're not moving enough, that some children, unbeknownst, and the doctors administering the vaccine have no idea that the child is getting an excessive amount of adjuvant. The other thing we want to talk about is that, going back to the breast, that for women it's very important that the upper out quadrant left breast, non-dominant side, to worry about. But if there's earrings involved and they're doing a lot of exercise, these metals can actually effectively change into the other breast and create a lot more heavy metals on the dominant side. So those are little indicators that we see. Also, the fact that when I see for thyroid, and I know we're going very quickly, when I see kind of like a rubber tire kind of effect, it's thick in two horizontal lines, that thyroid is loaded with the wrong type of minerals, and it's probably heavy metals, and it's probably calcifying. And so I can, without even, I can question the person, and they'll tell me they have a thyroid issue. But with that is just a physical thing of just visual. And that's what Dr. Mullane taught me 20 years under him, to actually look at the human body, look at these abnormal things that are normal. And so I'm giving these little things that I'm hoping people are writing them down. It's very important. That's what I learned from the great masters, to always have some writing material and write these down, because you can't remember all of them. And I hope that in today that we can address some of these things that are really important, that are people that can self-care, self-treat themselves. And so before they go visit that doctor, that they're able to ask doctor these questions. What are my heavy metals? What's my aluminum? why is this lymph node bothering me? And if you don't get the right answer, get out of Dodge. You want the right answers.
Absolutely. That's terrific information. Like I say, it's a world of information. We've kind of come to the end of our time, but tell people how they can get a hold of you real quickly. We do have a link on your page here, but tell them in the video.
Yeah,
here.
we have, they can, www.Herbalix Restoratives, and that is spelled HERBALIX .com. And we do have where you could just type in Herbalix Restoratives online, look up detox cleansing deodorant, and usually you're led to us. And so if you want information, we are actually interpreters and distributors for the Oligoscan. We've kind of joined with them because we find this such an important device. Because people go in and they get a urine or blood analysis and they got to come back. And this allows the practitioner to instantly check their tissues for everything right there. And we have a lot of great doctors out there that are now using this. And it's going around the world very rapidly. It hasn't quite developed here in the United States. I think we're kind of 27th on the healthcare list around the world, and there's a reason for that. And we need to address the heavy metals, because if you don't address the heavy metals, you're not going to get the minerals and supplements to work. So I think leaving at that, front load the heavy metals first, address those, and you can more address your minerals and supplements in your body. That's a hard concept. It's not taught in medical school.
Yeah. No, that's terrific. Well, that's a good note to end on, but I do appreciate you coming. That's just a world of great information, and we all can benefit, because I use that Thai crystal stone. I thought that's supposed to be the good stuff, and it's like, oh, now I know better. So
well, we need to speak, because I can address that later on privately, and on a personal level, I can see it.
Oh, wow.
You know what else? We have a study that we can share with anyone. It talks about that. It compares it to the antiperspirants, and it's actually more harmful to the body than antiperspirants because it's non-buffered. And what's happened is it's actually killing the DNA on the underarm.
Okay, well, I'm glad to know. I'll quit using it.
I hope we've addressed this for a lot of people out there, so they can get restored.
Great. Well, thanks again. It's wonderful having you, and I'm going